My name is Margaret Rose, and for 61 years, I've believed only in what I could touch with these two hands. Faith was for Sunday mornings and desperate people. Hard work, clean sheets, and showing up on time, those were my gods. Every morning at 5:47 a.m., my old Buick coughs to life in the parking lot behind my duplex on Maple Street. The radio crackles with farm reports and weather I already know by the ache in my knees. Hillside Care Center sits on the edge of Millerville like a brick afterthought, surrounded by cornfields that stretch to nowhere. It's not the kind of place anyone dreams of working, but it's where I've been for 16 years, and it's honest work. I'm what they call environmental services. That's hospital talk for cleaning up after people who can't clean up after themselves. I mop floors, empty trash, wipe down surfaces that have seen more sorrow than most churches. The doctors barely see me. I'm invisible until something's dirty. The nurses nod politely, but they're too busy saving lives to learn my name. That's fine by me. I never needed attention. But the patients, they're different. Mrs. Henderson in 204 always asks about my granddaughter, even though I've told her a dozen times I never had children. Mr. Kowalski in 312 saves me crossword clues from yesterday's paper. And there's something about room 317, the one with the big east window, that makes everyone smile when I pull back those curtains. The sunlight is the best medicine, I tell them, though I'm not sure I believe it myself. Growing up in Ohio farm country, church was something you did between chores. My mother dragged us to First Baptist every Sunday, more out of habit than conviction. I learned the songs, memorized the verses, but it all felt like someone else's story. Good people went to heaven, bad people went to hell, and most of us just muddled through somewhere in between. When mom passed 12 years ago, I stopped pretending it mattered. I rent half of a duplex from Carl Brennan, whose wife used to clean at the hospital before her arthritis got too bad. It's nothing fancy, two bedrooms, one bathroom, a kitchen with linoleum that's seen better decades. I keep it clean, pay my rent on time, and watch the evening news with a frozen dinner on a TV tray. Weekends I grocery shop, do laundry, and sometimes drive out to Westview Cemetery to pull weeds from mom's grave, not because I think she's watching, but because someone should care. The truth is, I've always been practical about everything. When my high school boyfriend Jimmy talked about getting married, I said we should wait until we had money saved. When he got drafted for Vietnam, I told him I'd write every day, but we both knew better. When the letter came saying he'd been killed near Da Nang, I cried for exactly one afternoon, then got on with living. That's what you do. You get on with living. Science makes sense to me. Germs cause infections, so you use bleach. Hearts stop pumping, so people die. The sun rises because the earth spins, not because God winds up some celestial clock. I've seen enough death in this place to know it's final. One minute someone's complaining about the meatloaf, the next minute their family's in the parking lot crying over what to do with the belongings. That's biology, not theology. But late at night, when I'm lying in bed listening to the furnace kick on, I sometimes wonder where all the love goes. Not the greeting card kind of love, the real stuff. The way Mrs. Henderson's eyes light up when her son visits from Chicago. The way Mr. Kowalski's hands shake when he talks about his late wife. Where does that go when the heart stops? I tell myself it doesn't matter. We're born, we live, we die, and that's the whole story. The universe doesn't owe us meaning, and wanting something to be true doesn't make it so. I've seen enough families in waiting rooms clutching tissues and whispering about God's plan to know that hope is just another word for not wanting to face facts. My shift starts at 6 a.m. sharp. I park in the same spot, enter through the service door, and punch in at the time clock that's been broken for 3 months. First stop is always the supply closet. Clean rags, disinfectant, trash bags, the tools of my trade. Then I start my rounds, room by room, making things clean for people who are anything but. They call me the quiet worker because I don't make a fuss. I do my job, collect my paycheck, and go home. But if I'm being honest, and I guess at 61 there's no point in lying, I sometimes feel like I'm cleaning up after a party I was never invited to. Everyone else seems to know something I don't, about purpose, about meaning, about what happens next. I just keep my head down and trust in what I can prove. That's been enough for most of my life. But lately, especially in room 317, when that morning light cuts through the window like something alive, I've been wondering if being practical is just another word for being afraid. Thursday afternoon, 2:47 p.m. I remember checking the clock on the wall by the nurse's station because my shift was supposed to end at 3, and I was thinking about stopping at Kroger for milk on the way home. The rain had just stopped, and everything smelled like wet concrete and that clean, sharp scent that comes after a storm. I was mopping the hallway on the third floor when I heard Mrs. Patterson's voice from room 317. She had Alzheimer's, and her family visited less and less as the months went by. Most days she didn't recognize anyone, but she was harmless, just confused and frightened by a world that made no sense anymore. Help me catch it, she was calling. Someone help me catch the light. I set the mop bucket against the wall and went to check on her. The floor was still damp from my cleaning, and I could see wet footprints where she'd walked to the big east window. She was standing there in her hospital gown and slippers, reaching up toward the glass with both hands, her fingers spread wide like a child trying to catch snowflakes. Mrs. Patterson, you need to get back in bed now. But she wasn't listening. The late afternoon sun was streaming through that window, brighter than usual after the rain, casting everything in gold. She pressed her palms against the glass and looked back at me with eyes that were suddenly, strangely clear. It's so beautiful, she whispered. Can't you see it? All that light, just waiting for us to take it. I'd seen this before. Patients near the end sometimes had moments of clarity, like fog lifting off a lake. The doctors called it terminal lucidity. I called it heartbreaking. Come on, sweetheart, I said, reaching for her arm. Let's get you comfortable. That's when she grabbed my wrist with surprising strength and pulled me toward the window. Look, she said urgently. Just look. I looked. The sun was setting behind the cornfields, painting the sky orange and pink, nothing I hadn't seen 1,000 times before. But Mrs. Patterson was smiling like she'd found treasure. I can almost reach it, she said, and pushed harder against the window. The frame groaned. These old windows hadn't been properly maintained in years. I'd mentioned it to maintenance twice about the loose hardware in 317. But budget cuts meant things got patched instead of fixed. Mrs. Patterson, step back. That window isn't. The frame gave way, metal twisted, glass exploded outward. Mrs. Patterson tumbled forward, and instinct made me grab for her, trying to pull her back. But her weight and momentum carried us both through the opening, and suddenly we were falling. 3 stories, maybe 4 seconds in the air, but time stretched like taffy. I could see fragments of glass catching the sunlight, sparkling as they fell around us. I could hear my own voice making a sound I'd never heard before, not a scream, just breath being forced out of my lungs. Below us, the hospital's flower garden rushed up to meet us, the neat rows of marigolds and petunias that the volunteers tended every Tuesday morning. Mrs. Patterson hit first. I heard the impact, wet and final. Then I landed hard on my left side, my hip and shoulder taking most of the force. Pain shot through me like electricity, and for a moment I couldn't breathe at all, but I was alive, broken, but alive. Mrs. Patterson wasn't moving. I tried to call for help, but only managed a whisper. Blood was pooling under my cheek, warm and metallic. I could hear voices above us, shouts, running footsteps, someone yelling for Dr. Morrison to get to the garden immediately. My vision started to fade in and out. I remember thinking how strange it was that the marigolds were still intact around us, bright orange and yellow, like nothing had happened, like the world was going on exactly as before. The paramedics arrived in what felt like minutes, but was probably longer. I heard them working on Mrs. Patterson first. Then someone knelt beside me. Ma'am, can you hear me? Ma'am, stay with me. They lifted me onto a backboard, and the movement sent fresh waves of agony through my ribs and spine. Inside the ambulance, machines started beeping, heart monitor, oxygen levels, blood pressure cuff squeezing my arm every few minutes. BP's dropping, someone said. Possible internal bleeding? ETA to general? 6 minutes. But the beeping was getting slower. I could feel something fundamental going wrong inside my body, like an engine running out of oil. My chest felt heavy, and each breath required effort I didn't have. The paramedic was shining a light in my eyes, asking me questions I couldn't answer. What's your name? Do you know what day it is? Can you squeeze my hand? I wanted to tell him my name was Margaret Rose, that I'd worked at Hillside for 16 years, that I'd never been married or had children, that my mother was buried at Westview Cemetery, and no one would know to tell her I was dying. But words wouldn't come. In the emergency room, everything became fragments, ceiling tiles rushing past, bright lights, voices calling out numbers and medical terms I didn't understand. Someone cut away my uniform, the same blue scrubs I'd put on that morning, thinking about nothing more complicated than mopping floors and emptying trash cans. She's crashing, a voice said. The heart monitor changed its rhythm from steady beeps to something irregular and urgent, then slower, then just occasional blips with long spaces of silence between them. I felt strangely peaceful. The pain was fading, replaced by a heaviness that wasn't unpleasant. I thought about Mrs. Patterson reaching for that light through the window, so determined to catch something the rest of us couldn't see. Lost pulse. Starting compressions. But their voices sounded far away now, like they were calling to me from another room. The ceiling lights above me seemed dimmer, or maybe my eyes weren't working right anymore. I tried to say that it was okay, that I wasn't afraid, but I don't think any sound came out. The last thing I remember thinking was how quiet it suddenly was. No more beeping, no more voices, no more pain, just silence, deep and complete, like falling asleep after the longest day of your life. So this is it, I thought. This is how it ends, and then nothing. I opened my eyes to fluorescent lights humming overhead, but something was different. The ceiling was higher than it should be, and the walls gleamed with a soft, pearl like luminescence that seemed to come from within the paint itself. I was lying on a bed, but when I sat up, there was no pain, no broken ribs, no bruised hip, no blood. I was wearing my blue scrubs, the same ones they'd cut away in the emergency room, but they were clean and whole again. My hands looked like my hands, but when I held them up to the light, I could see through them slightly as if I were made of the finest glass. The hallway stretched in both directions, impossibly long and pristine. The floors weren't linoleum. They were something that caught and reflected light like water, but felt solid under my feet. Soft music drifted through the air, not from speakers, but as if the walls themselves were humming lullabies. I walked to the nearest door and looked at the nameplate. Room 204, Mrs. Henderson's room. But when I pushed the door open, I gasped. She was sitting by the window, but not the Mrs. Henderson I knew. This woman had dark hair swept back in a neat bun, smooth skin, and bright eyes that sparkled with intelligence. She wore a simple white dress instead of a hospital gown, and she was reading a book, actually reading, turning pages with steady hands. Margaret, she said, looking up with a smile that I recognized despite her transformed appearance. I wondered when you'd get here. Mrs. Henderson? How are you? I mean, you look like myself again, she finished gently. Like I was before the forgetting started, before the fear set in. She stood up, moving with the grace of a young woman. You know, your smile was the last thing I remembered clearly before everything went dark. My throat tightened. I was just doing my job. No, she said, walking over to take my hand. Her touch was warm and real, more real than anything I'd ever felt. You were being kind to someone everyone else had given up on. Do you know what that meant to me? I couldn't answer. Tears were streaming down my face, but they felt different, cleaner somehow, without the salt sting of earthly crying. She led me back into the hallway, and now I noticed other doors opening. From room 312 came Mr. Kowalski, but he was walking without his oxygen tank, his shoulders straight and strong. From room 208, Mr. Davidson emerged, his amputated leg restored, taking confident steps on two healthy feet. One by one they came out, all the patients I'd cared for over the years, all of them young and vital, all of them smiling at me with recognition and something that looked like gratitude. We've been waiting, said Mrs. Chen from 305, the woman who died last winter while I was mopping her floor. We wanted to tell you. Tell me what? Mr. Kowalski stepped forward. That you were never just cleaning floors, Margaret. You were cleaning away our fear. I stared at them, these people I'd known only as sick and dying, now radiant with health and peace. I don't understand. I wasn't a nurse, I wasn't a doctor, I just tried to make things a little brighter. Exactly, said Mrs. Henderson. When we were trapped in bodies that were failing us, losing our memories, our dignity, our hope, you saw us, really saw us, not just patients, but people. The corridor filled with soft laughter, dozens of voices joining in harmony, people I'd forgotten, patients from my early years at Hillside, faces I'd mourned privately when I'd heard they'd passed. They were all here, all whole, all grateful. Your good morning, sweetheart, said Mrs. Chen. Your time for some sunshine. The way you always knocked before entering, like our privacy still mattered. The way you hummed while you worked, so we knew someone content was near. A woman approached from the far end of the hallway, and I knew immediately that she was different from the others. She wore the same white dress they all wore, but light seemed to emanate from her skin, and when she moved, the air itself seemed to sing. You cleaned more than floors, Margaret, she said in a voice like wind chimes. You cleaned away the loneliness. You polished their dignity. You swept away the feeling that they were forgotten. I fell to my knees, overwhelmed. But I was nobody special. I was just I was just someone who showed up to work. The radiant woman knelt beside me, and when she placed her hand on my shoulder, I felt something I'd never experienced in 61 years of life: complete, perfect acceptance. You showed up, she said simply, when it would have been easier to look away, to treat them like objects instead of people, to let them fade into invisibility. You showed up. You saw them. You acknowledged their humanity when the disease was trying to steal it away. I looked around at all these faces, these souls I'd unknowingly served, and finally understood. The quiet work I'd thought was meaningless, the gentle words, the respectful demeanor, the daily choice to treat dying people like living people, had mattered more than I'd ever imagined. Every sweetheart, said Mrs. Henderson, every time you opened our curtains to let the light in, every smile when you thought no one was watching. It was all healing, Margaret. Maybe not healing of the body, but healing of the spirit. The woman in white stood and extended her hand to me. Your real work is just beginning, but first, you need to see what you built with all those small kindnesses. She led me to a window that looked out onto gardens more beautiful than anything earthly. But there, among the impossible flowers and trees that swayed without wind, I could see something that made my heart nearly stop. It was a building, simple and clean, with large windows that sparkled with golden light, and above the door, in letters I somehow knew how to read even though they weren't quite English, were the words, "The house that Margaret built." Built with what? I whispered. With every moment you chose compassion over indifference, the woman said. With every day you decided that dignity mattered, even for the dying, especially for the dying. I stared at the impossible sight, this structure made of my small, forgotten acts of human decency, and realized that maybe I'd been wrong about everything. Maybe faith wasn't about believing in what you couldn't prove. Maybe faith was just showing up day after day and choosing to see the light in people even when their own light was fading. The radiant woman took my hand, and her touch sent warmth flowing through me like sunlight through water. She led me away from the gathered patients, past doorways I hadn't noticed before, to a window that stretched from floor to ceiling. But this wasn't like the windows at Hillside. This one seemed alive, pulsing gently with golden light. Look down, Margaret, she said softly. Below us, I could see room 317 as if we were suspended directly above it. The window where Mrs. Patterson and I had fallen was boarded up now, and inside the room, medical equipment surrounded a body on the bed. My body. Doctors and nurses moved around it with urgent precision, their faces tense with concentration. They're trying so hard to save me, I whispered. They are, she agreed, because every life matters, even yours, Margaret, though you never believed it. I watched the scene below, the rhythmic compressions on my chest, the medications being pushed through IV lines, the monitor showing the erratic blips of a failing heart. It felt strange to see myself from the outside, this broken woman who'd spent 61 years thinking she was invisible. I wasn't important, I said. I was just someone who cleaned floors. The woman turned to face me, and for the first time I really looked at her. Her eyes weren't quite human. They held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies, swirling with light and understanding that made me feel both infinitely small and completely cherished. Margaret Rose, she said, and somehow she made my plain name sound like music. Do you know what I see when I look at your life? I shook my head, afraid to guess. She gestured to the scene below, but now the view was expanding, showing not just room 317, but the entire hospital, then the town, then a perspective that encompassed years instead of minutes. I could see myself in dozens of moments, mopping hallways, adjusting blankets, opening curtains, offering gentle words to frightened patients. I see light, she said. Every gentle touch became light here. Every smile you gave became medicine. Every time you chose kindness over indifference, every time you saw dignity in the dying, it created something beautiful in realms you never knew existed. As she spoke, I began to see it too. Golden threads of light emanating from each small act of compassion, weaving together into something magnificent. The threads connected to other lights, Mrs. Henderson's daughter visiting more often because her mother seemed happier after I'd brightened her day. Mr. Kowalski's son calling more frequently because his father mentioned the cleaning lady who saved him crossword puzzles. Families feeling less afraid in the hallways because someone had taken time to smile. Small kindness is the greatest healing, she continued, her voice filling the space around us like warm honey. Not healing of the body always, that's just one kind of medicine, but healing of the spirit, healing of loneliness, healing of the fear that comes when people feel forgotten. I was crying again, but these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of recognition, of finally understanding something I'd missed my entire life. I thought faith meant believing in things you couldn't prove, I said. Faith is simpler than that, she replied. Faith is trusting that love matters even when you can't see the results. Faith is showing up every day and choosing to treat people like they're precious, even when the world tells you they're worthless, especially then. She pointed back to the scene below where the doctors were still working on my broken body. They're fighting for you because they understand something you never learned about yourself. You're not invisible, Margaret. You never were. Every soul you touched saw you clearly. The realization hit me like a physical force. All those years of feeling unimportant, of believing that my life didn't matter because I wasn't educated or accomplished or recognized, I'd been measuring myself by the wrong standard. I'd been looking for significance in all the wrong places. The mystery isn't whether you matter, the woman said gently. The mystery is why you spent so long believing you didn't. Around us, the air began to shimmer with something that wasn't quite music and wasn't quite light, but somehow contained both. I felt my consciousness expanding, touching something vast and loving that had always been there, but which I'd never allowed myself to feel. What you call God, she said, reading my thoughts, isn't a distant judge keeping score of your failures. It's this love that you've been swimming in your entire life, the love that moved through you every time you chose gentleness over hardness, connection over isolation. I thought of all the times I'd wondered where love goes when people die, and suddenly I knew it doesn't go anywhere. It stays, woven into the fabric of everything, multiplying and spreading in ways too complex and beautiful for human understanding. You were never just cleaning floors, she said, smiling. You were polishing souls. You were washing away despair. You were opening windows to let light into dark places. That's not small work, Margaret. That's sacred work. Below us, the monitors in room 317 began showing a steadier rhythm. The doctors stepped back, cautiously optimistic. One of them, a young resident I'd seen in the hallways but never spoken to, wiped his forehead and said quietly, "Come on, Margaret, don't give up on us." "He knows my name," I said in wonder. "They all do," the woman replied. "You were never invisible, my dear one. You were just looking away." As the golden light around us grew brighter, I felt something fundamental shifting inside me. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly loved, not for what I'd accomplished or earned, but simply for showing up and being human with other humans who needed someone to see them as more than their diseases or their losses. "Is it time to go back?" I asked. The woman squeezed my hand. "That's your choice to make. But remember, now you know the truth about your life. Now you understand what you've been building all along without realizing it." I looked once more at my body below, at the medical team that had refused to give up on someone they barely knew, and felt something I'd never experienced before: genuine gratitude for the gift of being alive. The golden light around us began to pulse like a heartbeat, and I felt myself being pulled gently away from the window, away from the radiant woman, back towards something I couldn't see but somehow knew was waiting. "It's time, isn't it?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. She smiled, and in that smile was both infinite love and gentle sadness. "Your body is calling you back, Margaret. The doctors haven't given up, and neither should you." "But I don't want to leave," I said, the words spilling out like a child's plea. "Here, everything makes sense. Here, I understand who I am. What if I go back and forget all of this?" "You won't forget," she assured me. "Not completely. The knowing will stay with you, woven into your soul like golden thread through fabric. You'll carry this understanding back with you, that every small kindness matters, that love is never wasted, that you were never invisible." The scene below us in room 317 was becoming more urgent. One of the doctors was preparing to call time of death, checking his watch with tired eyes, but the young resident, the one who'd known my name, was still pressing rhythmically on my chest. "Just a little longer," he was saying. "Something about her, I don't know, I just feel like she's still fighting." The woman placed her hand over my heart, and warmth spread through me like sunrise. "That young doctor? He's been praying for you, even though he's not sure he believes in prayer anymore. His grandmother taught him to never give up on people, especially the forgotten ones. Your life has already touched his in ways he doesn't understand yet." As she spoke, I felt a tugging sensation, as if invisible threads were pulling me downward. The golden light was fading. the perfect peace beginning to recede. But instead of fear, I felt something I'd never experienced before: purpose. "Will I see you again?" I asked. "Every day," she said softly. "Every time you choose love over fear, kindness over indifference, connection over isolation, I'm there. Every time you help someone remember their worth, every time you open a curtain to let light into a dark place, you're doing my work." The tugging became stronger. I could feel myself descending, leaving behind the hall of healing and the patients who'd waited to thank me. But their voices followed me down. "Remember us, Margaret. Remember that love never dies. Remember that you matter." The descent accelerated, and suddenly I was rushing toward that familiar room, toward the broken body on the bed that was somehow mine. I felt myself re entering flesh and bone, like diving into cold water, the perfect peace replaced by the harsh reality of physical pain. My chest burned, my ribs ached with every compression, but underneath the pain was something new, a deep, unshakable certainty that I was loved, had always been loved, even in my darkest moments of feeling invisible and worthless. The first sound I heard was the steady beep of the heart monitor resuming its rhythm, then voices, urgent and relieved. "We've got a pulse. Blood pressure's climbing. Margaret? Margaret, can you hear me?" I tried to open my eyes, but they felt impossibly heavy. My throat was raw from the breathing tube, but I managed to whisper, just loud enough for the young resident leaning over me to hear. They were young, and they were smiling. He looked confused, glancing at the other medical staff. "Ma'am, who is young?" "You've been unconscious for almost 20 minutes." But I was looking past him, through the window where late afternoon sunlight was streaming into room 317, painting everything in gold, the same light that had surrounded me in that other place, the same warmth that had shown me the truth about my life. Dr. Morrison, the chief of staff, appeared at my bedside. "Margaret, you gave us quite a scare. How are you feeling?" I turned to look at him, really look at him, and for the first time in 16 years of working in this hospital, I saw him not as an authority figure who barely noticed me, but as a person who'd spent the last 20 minutes fighting to save the life of a cleaning woman he'd never formally met, because every life mattered to him. "Thank you," I whispered, "for not giving up on me." His eyes softened with surprise and something that looked like recognition. "Of course not, Margaret. You're part of our family here." Family. The word hit me like a revelation. All these years, I'd been part of something bigger than myself and hadn't even known it. The patients who waited for my morning greetings, the nurses who nodded at me in the hallways, the doctors who knew my name even when I thought I was invisible, we were all connected, all part of an intricate web of small kindnesses and quiet care. Over the next few hours, as the medical team monitored my recovery, people kept appearing at my bedside. Nurses from different floors, some who'd worked with me for years, others I barely knew. They brought flowers, worried expressions, and stories I'd never heard before. "You always remembered my birthday," said Linda from pediatrics. "You were the only one who asked about my son when he was deployed," said Tom from maintenance. "You made my first day less scary," said a young nurse I'd met just weeks ago. Each visitor was another piece of proof that the vision had been real. I hadn't been invisible. My small acts of human kindness had mattered more than I'd ever imagined. The golden threads I'd seen in that other realm weren't metaphors. They were the actual connections between souls, strengthened by every smile, every gentle word, every moment of choosing to see dignity in suffering. As evening approached and the hospital settled into its quieter rhythm, I lay in the bed that had once held Mrs. Patterson, looking out the same window where she'd reached for light just hours ago. But now I could see what she'd been reaching for: not just sunlight, but the deeper light that connects all living things, the love that never dies even when bodies fail. The young resident stopped by during his rounds, checking my chart with tired but satisfied eyes. "You know," he said quietly, "in all my years of medicine, I've never seen anyone fight their way back the way you did. It was like you had something important left to do." I smiled, feeling the warmth of that golden light still flowing through me, transformed but not diminished. "I do," I said. "I have people to take care of, curtains to open, light to let in." He looked puzzled but smiled back. "Well, take it easy for a few days. Doctor's orders." After he left, I closed my eyes and felt the presence I'd met in that other place. Not gone, but woven now into the fabric of my everyday awareness. Tomorrow, I would return to work, to my simple routines of cleaning and caring, but I would never again doubt that this quiet work was sacred work, never again wonder if my life mattered. In room 317, surrounded by the gentle beeping of monitors and the soft whisper of evening settling over Hillside Care Center, I finally understood what faith really meant. It wasn't about believing in things you couldn't prove. It was about showing up every day and choosing love, even in a world that often made love feel impossible. Especially then, 3 months later, I wasn't mopping floors anymore. Dr. Morrison found me sitting in the hospital cafeteria on a Tuesday morning, still wearing my civilian clothes instead of scrubs. I'd been coming in every day since my medical leave ended, but I couldn't bring myself to pick up a mop. Every time I tried, I'd remember the radiant woman's words: "Your real work is just beginning." "Margaret," he said, sliding into the chair across from me, "we need to talk." I looked up from my untouched coffee. "I know. I'm sorry. I can't go back to pretending that what I was doing before was enough." He studied my face with the careful attention of someone who'd spent decades reading patients. "Tell me what you mean." So I did. Not the whole story, I wasn't ready for that, but enough. I told him about Mrs. Patterson reaching for the light, about how many patients died feeling forgotten, invisible, unworthy of attention because they were no longer profitable or curable, about how I'd spent 16 years cleaning around suffering instead of addressing it directly. "What if," I said, my voice gaining strength, "what if we had someone whose only job was to sit with the patients everyone's given up on? Not to provide medical care, but just to be present, to make sure no one dies alone thinking they don't matter." Dr. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. "You're talking about a position that doesn't exist in any hospital budget? Then we create one." He raised an eyebrow. "We?" "I'll work for free," I said. "I have enough saved to live on." This isn't about money. This is about the thing we keep forgetting in all our medical training, that dying people are still people. That conversation led to another, then another. By winter, Hillside Care Center had its first comfort companion position. The administration couldn't quite figure out how to classify me. I wasn't medical staff, wasn't clergy, wasn't family. I was something new, someone whose only job was to make sure no patient faced their final moments feeling worthless or alone. Every day at 3 p.m., when the medical rounds were finished and families had gone back to their lives, I made my own rounds. Not with a mop and cleaning supplies, but with a simple wooden chair that I'd carry from room to room. I'd sit beside beds, hold hands that no one else wanted to hold, and offer the same words Mrs. Henderson and the others had taught me were medicine. "You're not alone, sweetheart. You matter. You are seen." Sometimes I'd talk to comatose patients, sharing stories about the weather, the news, my grocery shopping, anything to fill the silence with the sound of someone caring. Other times I'd just sit quietly, my hand resting on theirs, letting them know through touch that they weren't forgotten. The staff was skeptical at first. Dr. Chen from oncology asked me bluntly what I thought I was accomplishing with patients who were barely conscious, but then something started happening that no one could explain. Mrs. Garcia in 208, who'd been unresponsive for weeks, suddenly opened her eyes during one of my visits and whispered, "Thank you for staying." She died 2 hours later, but her daughter told me it was the first time her mother had seemed peaceful in months. Mr. Thompson in 315 had been agitated and pulling at his tubes every night. After I started spending an hour with him each afternoon talking about his grandchildren whose names I'd learned from his chart, his nighttime distress disappeared. The young resident who'd fought to save my life started stopping by during my visits. "I don't understand it," he said one day, "but something about what you're doing. It's changing the whole atmosphere on these floors." What I couldn't tell him was that I wasn't doing anything magical. I was simply treating dying people like living people, the way the patients in that other realm had shown me I'd always done without realizing it. Every gentle word, every moment of genuine attention, every refusal to look away from suffering, it was all creating those golden threads I'd seen, connections that lasted beyond the body's capacity to hold them. 6 months into the program, Linda from pediatrics approached me with tears in her eyes. "Margaret, I have to tell you something. My father died last week, and I couldn't be there. But knowing that someone like you might be sitting with other people's fathers, making sure they're not alone, it helps. It really helps." That's when I understood fully why I'd come back. Not to clean floors, but to clean away the isolation that surrounds death in our world. Not to cure disease, but to heal the loneliness that makes dying feel like punishment instead of transition. On the anniversary of my fall, I found myself back in room 317. They'd repaired the window, installed new safety glass, but the afternoon light still streamed in with the same golden warmth I remembered. I sat in my wooden chair beside the empty bed, thinking about Mrs. Patterson and wondering if she'd found the light she'd been reaching for. A new patient was being admitted later that day, a woman my age with late stage pancreatic cancer, no family listed in her chart. Tomorrow afternoon, I would sit with her, hold her hand, and make sure she knew she mattered. And if she asked me, as so many did, whether I believed there was anything after this life, I would tell her the truth. I don't know what happens after we die, but I know that love doesn't waste anything. Every moment of kindness you've ever given, every person you've ever helped feel less alone, that lives on. That matters forever. As evening settled over Hillside Care Center, I looked out the window of room 317 where it all began. The sun was setting behind the cornfields, painting the sky in shades of gold that reminded me of another light, warmer and more permanent than anything earthly sunshine could provide. The window was still there, still letting light in, but now I understood that the most important light, the light that heals hearts and connects souls, comes not from outside, but from within. From the simple decision to show up, to see dignity in suffering, to choose love over indifference every single day, from the choice to remember that in a world full of so much darkness, we are all called to be sources of light for one another, especially in the places where death makes people feel most forgotten. That light never goes out, it just gets passed from one person to another, growing brighter with each act of quiet kindness, each moment of genuine care. In room 317, the window still holds the light, but now so do the people who remember what it means to truly see each other.